Hello again. I have been reading with incredulity the comments made on one of those crank channels which are dedicated to debunking me. History debunked, as one might not inaptly call it. The thing which astonishes me is not that people sometimes disagree with me. That's only to be expected, and I dare say that I'm wrong half the time anyway. Most of us are. It's rather that those that disagree with me seem to do so without even understanding what it is I am saying. That is weird. To give one instance, there was a trial for murder recently in which a woman was convicted of a particularly gruesome crime. She chopped off the head of another woman after killing her. This was a very strange case, but several people have remarked that because the murderer was white, then this somehow proves that I'm wrong about the observations which I have made over the last few months about ethnicity and crime. Of course, had I been speaking in absolute terms, that would be perfectly true. If I had said at any time, foreigners and members of ethnic minorities are the only people who ever commit grotesque and unusual murders, then producing a single murder would be enough to disprove what I was saying, if it was singularly odd. I have, of course, never said any such thing because that would be absurd. I can think of various bizarre murders carried out by white people in Britain. In the same way, some other fool said that white people commit the majority of crimes in this country. Well, of course they do. Never doubted that for a moment. There are far more white people than black or Asian ones, and of course in many types of crime, burglary for example, white people will lead the field. This is because it is impossible to generalize about crimes of any kind. We might observe, say, that most murders by firearms in London are carried out by black people and foreigners. But that doesn't mean that no white person ever commits such crimes and that no white person has ever used a firearm to kill someone in London. In the same way, the great majority of burglars are young white men, but that doesn't mean that there are no black burglars or even the occasional female burglar. In other words, the people who are religiously reporting every video of mine to YouTube in the hope of getting this channel cancelled are doing so because they do not really understand what I'm saying. It sounds racist to them, and that's enough to call for me to be banned. Take, for instance, a claim which I made in a recent video, which is that so far this year, there has not been a single case of a white British woman being murdered by a white British man in London. Now, that is a very precise and specific suggestion, and there can be only two possibilities: that I am either right or wrong. If I am right, then this might be interesting. If I'm wrong, well then there's an end to the matter, and anybody who doesn't like what I'm saying can simply give us an example of such a crime, and I will freely say I was wrong about this. If I am right, then I think it reasonable to ask whether the situation might be connected in some way with immigration, which I believe it almost certainly is. Now, of course, I am not claiming that never in the past has a white British man murdered a white British woman in the capital. I can think of a couple of dozen crimes like that offhand without racking my brains. Nor am I saying that all immigrants kill women. I am drawing attention to one very clearly defined circumstance which I find interesting and which might be relevant to a debate on the merits or disadvantages of large-scale immigration and the changing demography of Britain. On one of these channels, which aim to disprove what I say, a person cites several cases of white British people who have committed murders in London. The case of Sarah Everard is mentioned by people in the comments, as though that too tends to disprove what I am saying. Sarah Everard may be seen in the thumbnail to this video. This is, of course, all mixed in with various playground insults. For example, that I have AIDS, that my wife ran off with a black man, that I grew up on a council estate, and so on. That sort of thing really does take me back to my childhood. I remember boys taunting each other by saying that such and such a person lived on a council estate. It's quite brings back, it's very nostalgic. Just to remind viewers, I said this year no white British woman has been murdered in London by a white man. Of course, last year Sarah Everett was a white British woman murdered by a white British man. But I said nothing about last year. I confined myself to speaking of this year. I was talking about a current and very noticeable trend. You see, not what happened last year or in 1960, nor yet about the year that Jack the Ripper murders took place. I was talking about this year in London. The fact that those who are infuriated by the things which I say and they were unable actually to contradict what I said, but were obliged to turn to other years is interesting, as too is the fact that they find it necessary to make up silly stories about my past. It suggests to me strongly that what I say is incontrovertibly true, and that nobody is able to find any evidence that what I say on this channel is false in any respect. I've never made any foolish claims that no white people commit murders, or that all black people are violent, or anything of the kind. Always, I am speaking of percentages and proportions, whether we are looking at murders, A-levels, the number of people of this or that ethnicity who qualify as architects, or anything else. There are stupid and murderous white people, just as there are virtuous and intelligent black ones. The question I have asked is whether the proportions vary among different populations, about which I'm by no means certain, but think that there is good reason to suppose it may be so. Producing a murder committed by a white person, or an example of a black man who is wise and good, will have no bearing at all on the matter, because we are talking of trends and not absolutes. I don't suppose for a moment that explaining this will make any difference to these characters, but perhaps it will make my own position clearer to other people.